Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Sound of AI Fireside Chats. In this podcast series, I talk to leaders in music and audio tech, picking their brains on the impacts that AI and tech is having on the space. In this quite long episode, I've had a fascinating chat with Gad Hinkis, founder and CEO of Jambl. Gad is a musician and a visionary who's on a journey to revolutionize how we create music together. In our conversation, we touched upon a ton of things, from the relationship between music and emotions to the future of music creation. We also delved into startup and business topics, discussing the good and bad of being a music tech startup and of how to raise venture money. I hope you enjoy the show. Hi, Gad. It's really nice to have you here on the show.
Hey, man. What's up? All good. Yeah, really great to be here.
Cool. Nice. So let's just get started. And I want to ask you something that I always ask to other people on the show. So tell me a little bit more about your background, where you come from, and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, sure. So I've been a music producer since the year 2000.
Yep.
I never played any instruments. I was always more interested in video games or comic books. But then as a kid, I wanted always to. We had a piano at the house, and I thought, I'm just gonna bang on it, and it's gonna make something beautiful, and everybody's gonna love me. But it didn't work out like that, and my parents wanted to send me to. They didn't enjoy the noise I was making, so they sent me to. Teacher, and I did never practiced one day in my life.
Right.
So that's why I stopped. I dropped, and I didn't do any music. And then in high school, I discovered electronic music, and realized that you can very easily create music with a computer. That's actually really, really good. And I became instantly hooked and made music every day of my life. Until around 5 years ago or 4 years ago, where I fell in love with the startup and making products. And that became even more exciting than actually sitting down and producing music.
Yeah, that's really good. And yeah, my next question would be attached to the first one, which is basically, and to this process. So how did you get into music technology, in this music tech startups, kind of environment, right?
So basically, so I said I'm 20 years I'm producing music,
right.
But in the last 10 years, I've since I never could play an instrument, that was always a hurdle for me with production and with live shows. So
right.
I was always jealous of my friends that could play instruments because they could improvise and they could have immediate and instant control over what they wanted to express.
Right.
If you could think about music production, it's like writing a letter that you go back and forth, you change things, you read it again, or writing a book, and playing an instrument, it's more like talking. So it's instant. If you have something in your heart, in your head, you can take it out immediately. There's no latency. And with production, especially on stage, if you're trying to improvise electronic music, it's a huge hassle. First of all, you have to buy gear, you have to connect it, and you have to come up with basically a whole system of how your live set would look like when you're trying to create music live. That's why most people will actually just DJ or have a live set where they trigger loops and mix them together. It's basically like DJing 2.0. You're mixing together pre-made arrangements, but you're not actually playing and you're not really expressing yourself instantly. And so that was the main thing that I tried to solve for myself just as a performer. And I started with so of course I tried different ways to connect gear to improvise, and I had first a little MIDI keyboard that I hacked together, inspired by people like Moldover that kind of coined the term controllerism,
right?
Which is basically the hacking and of electronic music improvisation for stage. And after that, I hooked up a joystick and sent some data into the computer and used a joystick to try and make music. And a few iterations of that I developed different techniques, and then suddenly I realized, hey, the available tools in Ableton are not enough. So I jumped into Max for Live, and started developing my own little plugins.
Cool.
And then I realized
I guess
if that's not enough.
No, I was just like jumping in saying, so you also like started coding, or at least like music coding, right?
Well,
at that point.
So I started in Max, but I quickly realized I'm not a developer.
Right.
And so I used my ability to convince people to do cool shit, which I think is the most important thing for entrepreneurs.
Right.
It's the most important quality, being able to convince people to do shit, and just had people help me build little Objective-C components for Max, just specifically for what I needed. And later on, a developer to help me make it into a prototype that was on the App Store, and business people, and one by one, adding more and more people to the team until also some investors became interested.
Cool. That's cool. And so this is how you founded Jambl, basically. So why don't you like tell me a little bit more like about Jambl? So what's Jambl? What's the idea behind it? And so yeah, what you guys are trying to achieve there?
Yeah. So sure. So like first of all, all this experience that I gathered for myself as a music creator, around 5 years ago, I tried to put that into a touch screen, an XY surface, really just for myself. Mm-hmm. And then this technique, this music engine that's behind Jambl right now was so addictive to me as a creator, first of all, that I saw that, wow, I can finally like close my eyes or like turn off the lights, and I don't have to look at the buttons. I don't have to look at the screen. I can just easily slide my finger around and control the music. So that became like a powerful moment that after that, I started to give it to other people and use it in festivals for like installations, or just in parties where I invited people and installed it on their phones. And at that time, it was just controlling Ableton.
Right.
And I saw that it's not only me, so other people get very excited with the experience. So I decided to turn it into a product and became more and more obsessed with the vision of like, what would happen if everyone in the world had the instant ability to create and express themselves actually through music creation. So this, because what I realized that if you look at every culture on earth, mm-hmm. every religion, every human society, there is some very important musical collaboration or musical experience in the center of that culture. And then I looked at modern culture and about how we are living in a society where music is considered for the minority few talented people. And if you ask an average person on the street, hey, would you like to make music? Most likely they would say, oh, I'm not creative, I'm not talented. There's a lot of fear around it.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that can be now with the technology and with this tool can be basically enhancing people's lives. And it goes really deep into that. So like there's a lot of spiritual stuff behind what I'm trying to do. The goal of the company is, you could say, is to create a more collaborative and creative human culture through the democratization of music creation, and to build actually like a parallel music industry besides the current industry, a parallel music industry for all of us, and that everyone can take part in, everyone can collaborate with each other, create music, and use it as a tool for expression, the same like people doing today with photos and videos and dancing on TikTok, just empowering people to reap the benefits of music for personal transformation and for the whole idea of collaborating with music. There's just so much inside music that can impact people's lives.
Yeah. That's super interesting. Take on the whole music landscape and what it means to be also a human being. Because in the end, music is part of who we are. And as you said, music is a universal. It's one of the few universals we have out there, right? As humans, but.
Yeah, it's very connected to language and to a lot of things.
Yeah, it's definitely obviously there's a lot of debate about whether or not music is actually a language, because obviously it lacks some level of semantics, so it doesn't necessarily have meaning. But
we can talk about that if you want.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's a lot of research that tells obviously there's a level of a syntax to that. There's a grammar to music and the way we compose pieces together, but then there's a problem in respect to the meaning itself. So
let's talk about that if you don't mind.
Oh yeah.
Unless you want to go.
No. Yeah, let's detour.
Okay,
this
cool.
is super interesting. What's your take on that? Right.
So my take on that is that music is the emotional language of nature. So I would say that when a metalhead is playing a power chord,
right,
or chopping, a dog can understand the emotional intention behind the sound because it's got a growl to it.
Right.
So you can communicate with animals with language. When a cat says, we all know what it means. Everyone knows what it means. Every animal can understand it. So we can actually just talk with animals. It's just that the human language is, of course, much more complex, and we can have abstract thoughts, and we can discuss about the abstract thoughts. But if you're just talking about emotional communication, then even the words themselves and the grammar is completely meaningless. It's only the melody, the timing of what you're talking, that is the real communication. So you could say exactly the same thing and have completely two different interpretations of it based on the music, not the words themselves.
Right. So you mean the prosody, for example, the way we utter, whether we are lowering our pitch, or whether we are just screaming
absolutely.
something
you could say
very loud like that, right?
Absolutely. Right. So you can tell a girl or a guy, whatever, you can tell, I really like you. Or you can say, oh, I really like you. The only difference is a musical difference. So that's the difference is musical. It's not language as we think of language.
Right.
And it changes the meaning completely.
Yeah, definitely. But I would say that there's a lot of truth in that, even though I think also emotional stuff that we usually attach to certain musical elements and things like that are not necessarily universal. So for example, I was reading some research, I think it was last week or something like that, about the response to the difference between major minor chords. In Western cultures against other cultures. And it's not really that clear whether different cultures are able to identify major chords as happy chords and minor chords necessarily as more, I would say sadder musical utterances. So there's still a debate going there, and it's not really that clear. But obviously then there are certain aspects of music, say for example the loudness in itself is a very good predictor of activity or energy, the arousal.
Absolutely.
But
no, I totally agree with you. I think that's absolutely right. And there's always a big, massive cultural component.
Yep.
Above that primal part.
Yeah.
You could be happy or feel happy with very sad music, for example, Arabic tonalities, or how they bend the notes. It's it could sound like a sad, crying, but for them, they interpret that as a happy thing for a party. So, of course, there's a lot of layers to that. So it's not that simplistic. But I guess what I mean that there's some underlying thing that could be universal. Maybe I'm wrong, you know? But for example, I like to think that a dog barking and a metal guitar is like similar, you know? It's similar intent.
That's a nice one. Yeah.
And you know what? Even more, I would say it goes beyond the animal kingdom. I think it goes even into nature. So even like nature is expressing some emotional intent. This is going very philosophical, right?
Right.
It's expressing some emotional intent with sound. So, for example, a distortion guitar, or like and a barking dog, you could say that a lightning, like a thunder sound. Animals can be frightened from this. So you could say, and it's actually dangerous. So lightning can. So like the connection between danger, loudness, distortion in sound. There seems to be something very, very universal, maybe beyond even the animal kingdom.
Yeah, it's probably, I would say, I would remain like on the animal level. And there I would say there's definitely like an evolutionary aspect to that, right? So you hear like this banging sounds, and that scares you like as an animal. And we just like inherited that being part of like the animal kingdom, right? And so in a sense, there may be like some projection like of like what we have like as musical like in our societies, and then it's somehow like related to who we are on an evolutionary level. So where like we hear like loud sounds, that it's basically like a call to action. It's a wake-up call. Be ready right. to fight, be ready to flight, right? So yeah, I see that as a very, very interesting aspect. And I mean like these two levels, so like nature versus nurture, and the way they melt together and they influence together, like it's just like amazing. And I think like over time, like there's been a lot of like research, I would say, like for example, like in academia and definitely like in ethnomusicological like circles, which was way more focused on the nurture side of things. So like the societal, the cultural aspect, and way less on the natural part, right?
You know what? I'm getting goosebumps just talking about this, because I think you're absolutely right, and it kind of solves a puzzle for me, because I think what happened is exactly as you're saying.
Yeah,
we got cues from nature about how to respond.
Yeah.
So, for example, a nice breeze, sound of a nice breeze in the willows is safety. Okay, it could be interpreted as a sound of safety and calm, because around the water, everyone comes to drink, and there's the willows, and now the sound of a flute is suddenly we humans used. We kind of try to replicate the feeling of nature through different instruments, different timbres, different harmonics. For example, of course, the pentatonic scale, as you probably know, it's actually based on natural subharmonics and overtones that occur in nature naturally. So it's also a scale that very much puts us in ease. It feels very complete, very natural. So I think it's absolutely probably right that nature for animals triggers some, especially mammals, triggers some emotional response that later they use to communicate with each other on an emotional level. So like, and I think that's the essence of music, is that before there's rhythm, before there's melody, before there's harmony, when there's just, you can say it's like noise music or like sound. Yeah. It's just pure emotional expression of some state of feeling. And that is very interesting, the history of how we got here.
Yeah, and I think it's amazing also the next step, which is, okay, so we have like all of these sounds like in nature, and probably we used some of those, not necessarily those specific sounds, but like the proxies to those sounds, and we organized a language or a grammar like around that to express ourselves. And this is like something really, really, yeah, fantastic, really also like difficult to grasp in a sense, right? So this level of being so intertwined between nature and nurture, like it's really, really like amazing the way like everything like musical has built like on top of that.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I think that's exactly where the cultural aspect, and also what's fascinating to me and what a lot about what I'm doing with Jambl is, I don't know if you read, so there's a big question that I've been asking myself for like a long time of my life, big part of my life, which is, what's the difference between humans and animals? How come I look around and I see these cities and I see human beings? They're such a weird animal.
Right.
What is it that differentiates us? Okay. And one interpretation or thought that I was very resonated with me is from Yuval Harari.
Oh yeah.
From this book, Sapiens.
Yeah. Great book, or great series of books there, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So the first one was really, really, I think, influential for me, also connected to my work with Jambl.
Mm-hmm.
And how he explained it from his perspective is that human beings have, of course, because of language and because of our ability to have abstract thought, that's like the how. But the what that differentiates us from animals is that we can collaborate on in very massive large groups and have a dynamic society.
Yep.
And he gives the example of two other species. One is chimpanzees that are very close to humans, and the other one is ants, an ant colony. Now, ant colony can work with 1 billion or million citizens in the colony, but their culture never changes. They only have one culture, and that's it.
Well, they don't have cultural evolution per se, but they have biological evolution. But obviously the scale there is way, way longer than cultural. So
basically their cultural evolution is dictated by their biology.
Yeah, it's the two things are the same.
Exactly. Yeah. And in chimpanzee societies, actually they can change their culture very fast.
Yeah.
But they cannot operate in big numbers.
Yeah.
If you put 200, if you put 20 chimps together and 20 chimps together in a completely different group, they could develop different ways of behaving, different structures, but there's not going to be like a society of like 1 million chimpanzees that can operate and have rules and everything, and it's flexible. And it's just going to be chaos. So, but in human beings, we have both. We can collaborate in large numbers, and we can be very, very fastly changing our culture and actually design our culture.
Yep.
And that's what leads to us learning from each other and stacking skills together to accomplish all these amazing things. Now, I believe that music has had an especially crucial role in the development on let's call it this human feature. Mm-hmm. Because what music does, part of many things, but a big thing that music does is it homogenizes culture, and it makes you feel like a stronger emotional belonging to your tribe.
Yeah.
The same like even a pack of wolves that are howling together, it releases some emotion of like being part of something. I think that human beings also, I know there's also research about how music releases oxytocin in the brain, which is regulating the feelings of group love, trust, friendship, and harmony with your community. So I think music had a huge importance in our early evolution to bring us closer together and being a more collaborative species.
Yeah, I think this is a great point, and it somehow like addresses like a major issue that we have like in like music cognition and evolutionary like music thought, which is okay. So how is it possible that we have music? So it doesn't seem to be like evolutionary speaking something that will give you a clear advantage like over, I don't know, something else. I mean, natural language, it's super easy to understand why we have it, because obviously that is a huge advantage, the ability to like organize your thoughts, to communicate with others in a semantic way. But what about music? And among like the many explanations that have been like provided by researchers over time, there is definitely this one. So music can give you a sense of belonging. It's almost like a regulator, like of society, and a regulator of relationships. And in that respect, it kind of like smoothen the whole, I don't know, it can smoothen conflicts. It can be used to just like express yourself and to find yourself as part of a society. And we see that like in rituals. It's not a case that it's not a case that like in almost like any ritual, like all over the world, you have one form of or another of music. And I mean, could be just like by chance, yeah, possibly, but it's highly unlikely, right?
Exactly. And then and I think the more you look at like more ancient societies, the more music is, and being active in music and being active in musical collaboration is more and more ingrained in daily life.
So can we say, going back to like your venture, like with Jambl, your tech venture, that in a sense you're trying to unleash this, I don't know, like wolf pack power of music and bring it back through a mobile app for Jambl?
Absolutely, baby. So that's the heart of I call it the spiritual mission behind Jambl. So behind all the pitch decks and the business models, and like, if I was in startup to make money, I would probably do like, I don't know, like Forex exchange or like,
You don't do music startups if you want to, music tech startups if you want to make money, right?
And obviously, I'm not going to send this link to this podcast to my investors.
I'm not going to share that as well.
No, but the point is that I think it's important to make money, of course, because if I'm very passionate about impact, and I'm concerned with the world, and I want to make a difference in the world. Then I need to have a company that's more than sustainable, that gives us enough resources to really make a dent in the universe, so to speak, and figuring out how to do that and how to break people's perception that music is not for me. No, like 90% of human beings are naturally musical to enough of a extent that they can benefit from it. And partly of that, I'm kind of wondering, like, I kind of have the feeling, thinking about this stuff, that it could be, maybe it's totally wrong, and music has a very small part to play, but it could be that music has a much bigger part to play because it's so like a part of our biology, engineering, our brain, how everything works. And maybe, you know what, maybe all the problems of modern society are because of the record industry, because suddenly... Because before there were records, people had to be more active in music to entertain themselves. So families would play together. People had more free time to learn even a few chords on the guitar or the harmonica or the banjo or something. And I think it was more part of everyday life. And since we have records, we can connect together by listening, but it's very reflective of modern society. We're consumers. We are not active participants in society. We're just consuming it. And it causes a lot of isolation and different things. So I'm thinking, how can we use this system that we're in to go beyond and reconnect with our humanity?
Right. And do you think that technology can play a role in all of this?
Honestly, I don't know because, but I'm gonna try because it could be that it's just, there's like the best way to do it. I think to reach that feeling for people to feel like they're part of the world and not just like consumers is actually, I think, with singing. So singing is the best way, exactly like the Wolves are doing. I think if human beings come together and sing, even simple, not even a song, it can be just notes. It can, if they do it a bit long enough, I think it can have a real psychoactive, well, from my experience, without taking drugs or without doing anything, just singing together in a group, I think has a biological effect that people have no idea about. That it's very, very powerful and can have some impact. So maybe people that are engaged in these kind of rituals, musical rituals, have better empathy for each other. It could be just that simple. Now I don't know, but
it could make a very interesting like experiment, right? In music cognition, or even like, I don't know, sociology, psychology, right? Trying to measure the empathy level of different people depending on how musically active they are. Is there like a correlation?
I'm 100% sure. I'm 100% sure there is. Think about any musician that you know, and compare them to any non-musician that you know, just in your head. Just make like a quick survey. I would say that on average, the people that are engaged in music, even though they might have a bigger ego, they're also much more open-minded, empathic, understanding of the other.
Interesting. I don't know if there's any research like in the space. There could be, because I mean, like it could be an interesting thing to compare like musicians against non-musicians with respect to certain, I don't know, like.
I guess that would be a relatively easy. I guess that would be a relatively easy experiment to do, just like a survey.
Yeah, obviously it wouldn't be like a full experiment in the sense that obviously you can control like for like the variables or things like that, but it would give you like kind of like epidemiological like approach, giving you an idea, right?
But another experiment that would be interesting is to take two groups of people.
Right.
One don't have any change in their life, and the other they go every day to sing together in a group for 40 minutes or like a few times a week.
Yeah.
And see change over time. I'm 100% sure they're going to be more happy, more fulfilled, more empathic.
Cool. Yeah,
I'm 100% sure.
Yeah, we should definitely reach out to our friends in academia, right? So we have time.
You have some people there?
Yeah, I have like obviously like a few friends, like given like my past background there, like in research, right? But yeah,
that's a really cool.
Yeah. It's definitely like an interesting like thing. Yeah. Interesting. Cool. So let's go back a little bit like to more canonical questions then. So because I want to really understand what you guys are doing like there, like at Jambl.
Oh, we're gonna talk about AI also.
Yeah, at some point we're gonna talk about that as well, right? So I mean, you can talk with some melodrive guy and not talk about AI music, right?
Good. Yeah.
Cool. Well, but first of all, so you've given us like your background. So coming like from music, your like almost like philosophical, like kind of like approach to things and all of this. How does this reconcile with like the business side of being like a startup founder? So how do you deal with those things? You are, at the end of the day, you are the CEO of Jambl. So how do you reconcile that?
Yeah.
And so how you've learned that side of things?
So that's a great question. And I have a lot to say about that as well. So first of all, I think that it's a double-edged sword, but there's definitely a very interesting advantages to coming from working with artists and working in bands, and then going into startup? Well, especially from the performance aspect. I mean, being on stage and knowing how to get people excited in the crowd. And that's, I think, is like a secret sauce that is very uncommon for founders. How to reconcile? For me, it's really about impact. If you want to have impact in the world, you need to play into the capitalist system. Now, I don't have any problem with that. The only question that I still don't know is, can you make a huge company that has a lot of impact without doing some damage? Now, I think that's an open question that I don't know yet. But I think you have better chances to have big impact on people's lives if you have enough resources to do that. Yeah. And so that's, in Kabbalah, there's the concept of the golden path, which is basically, it's a bit of a misunderstanding, the golden path. There's like the ego, and then there's like the altruism. These are the two opposite sides of the spectrum. So in Kabbalah, for example, you're not supposed to ignore the ego. So the ego is important, but it shouldn't be the leader. So ego is the driver. So let's say I want to be influential, I want to have an impact. That's a huge drive that can motivate to get up and do things and like fight. But you still need a direction of where to go. And the direction needs to be altruistic and not for yourself. So the two powers are, like, you could say, like, there's the money side and like the need to be greater and bigger and bigger and grow and grow and grow. This is like the more, you could say, the left brain, more capitalistic, more business side. And then you have the right brain, which is, of course, loosely speaking, right? Which is more, you could say, more altruistic, trying to make some positive impact, more collaborative, more organic, more creative. And I think you need it's not that you need a balance between both and you need to compromise, but rather one has to be the leading force, so the navigator, and the left side has to be the engine. You see, it's like a car. So you have the steering wheel and you have the engine and the gas or the electricity. And that's how you align those two forces together. And the question is, can you really do it without doing a lot of damage in the process? And can technology be used for this benefit? And that I still don't have the answer.
Right.
But I'm an optimist, and I think it's better chances to use technology and capitalism to take us to the next stage, to the next level of kind of society, than saying, oh no, technology is evil, let's go back to not having anything and like turn off the internet, you know? I don't think that's going to happen. So better put our bets there. So that's the first part about the whole thing. And next up, I would say that there is something that I think is often maybe misunderstood in startup culture, which is the idea of getting out of your comfort zone and working yourself to the ground and sacrificing some parts of yourself, or like your well-being in some way. And I think that's a bit of a misunderstanding. And how I see it is that actually, not only, I mean, the idea of comfort zone is tricky, because if you always try to get out and do something that you're uncomfortable. Maybe you're uncomfortable to do business development. Maybe it's just not for you. Maybe you're uncomfortable doing designs. Maybe it's just not for you. It's not your strengths. Maybe, and so on. So what I always like to think about is that you should find your comfort zone and stay there. But the trick is to find other people that have different comfort zone than you, and together you complete each other. So it's going back again to the idea of this. What's the point of music? Is to collaborate. What's the point of creating a business? Is to a bunch of people working together to create something greater than themselves.
Right.
And each one has a role to play inside of it. And yeah.
So yeah, it's no, I was just saying it's a very nice way to put it. Well, I mean, I would say there's a lot of advice there saying, yeah, focus on your strengths. Yeah, you can try to, I don't know, try to overcome your weaknesses, but mainly try to focus on your strengths, because it's there that you'll provide the most value to your teammates, to your co-founders, right? So, and that's for sure. So I see your point, but from my side, my experience, I would say I have another approach here, which is that of trying to push myself as much as I can, in as many things as I can, because there's this thing that I really like in startups, which is that of if you want, you can try so many different hats. Right. So one day you can work as a developer. And I mean, that's something that I love that I've been doing for 20 years now. Right. And do research. But the next day you should talk to VCs and try to do things like networking, business dev, and these things, where obviously in my case, I'm less confident and it's not my cup of tea, I would say, but still, I feel it's a very nice way of just trying out many things. And if you are a curious person, someone who wants to explore things, then it's definitely something for you.
And I think that's exactly the key. So you have curiosity. That's for me, that means that you're comfortable, even if it feels, even if it's scary. The fact that you're curious and you want to dive into it and get a taste. That's it. That means that you should follow it. But I think you need to develop a really, really amazing self-awareness if you want to be a good founder.
Yeah.
So that the moment that you're so I mean, for example, I have my own battle with personal battle with product management. You need to be there's a balance there that is needed. On one side, you need to be creative and a problem solver.
Yeah.
On the other hand, you need to be very organized and methodical and structured. So I'm more on the first side and not so much on the other, but I'm fascinated with the topic and I want to be the best I can.
Yeah.
So this energy is, of course, you have to follow that. But at some point, you have to also realize, okay, I got it. And now I can actually manage someone else that has more experience with me, and I can have insight into what they're doing actually.
Yeah.
So I think about it in that way.
Cool.
I'm not sure if that.
No. I mean, it's amazing. It's great, and obviously, different people coming to these types of experiences are gonna have different opinions on that. But it's really nice just to compare, contrast these different opinions, and I guess people can also learn a lot by just listening to this. Because I mean, one thing that you really don't realize until you are in there is that in order to really, I don't know, get a grasp of how to work in a startup, of how to manage all of these very complex processes, is that you have to be there. You have to make mistakes. You have to do silly things and realize that what that advisor told you 2 months ago was indeed for real, and it wasn't just some bullshit that he wanted to project on you, right? So
absolutely, you have to experience that.
Yeah. I mean,
you have to make your mistakes.
Oh yeah, and
absolutely.
Oh boy, how many I've made.
Yeah, I can hear you. I feel the same way.
Yeah.
There's so much time and money sometimes
Oh yeah.
Just doing things wrong, and
Yeah.
there's no way around it except maybe let someone else do it
Yeah. Yeah.
that has more experience. But then you don't, even then you don't know because you don't have the insight still.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like it's.
So
Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
another way to do it is that, I mean, I guess like for me, since I'm very lucky to be in a very fortunate state right now, even though it was a very long and hard battle to get here. But wait, I'll even say it like this. Okay, there's two things. First of all, about the hardship, we can talk a little bit about how to manage that. But second, what I wanted to say is that I'm very fortunate right now to have the investors. They're also our partners and publishers.
Yeah.
So if we have our strength as the company is more on the creative side, they bring a lot of business intelligence and a lot of experience to the table that is just upgrading our whole thing that we're learning like 20 times faster.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and I think like there's a lot of misconception in like first-time founders or like people with very little experience like in the space, which is okay. So I'm going to go to the VCs, venture capitalists, and ask for money, and once I have the money, I'm super happy with that. Well, that's the worst mistake you can make ever, because like it's not really about the money. There's way more than that. And what you are saying like resonates so much like with this idea that like an investor is not just like a paycheck, is like the connections like that these people have with the industry, with your potential customers, the experience that they bring on the table, the partners, like also I mean,
and which goes.
Yeah, no, I was just asking, like, what's your take on that? Because I think, like, this is like such an important thing to highlight, and I should never be tired, like, of saying that.
Yeah. So for me, it's the same as I was saying about comfort zones. So if you inside the company, in the roles, in C-level, in the hiring that you do, you always look to complete each other's comfort zones, basically, to create one big circle. That completes each other. That's how you should build your team.
Yeah.
Now, beyond that, you could say that your whole company has limitations, so that you should look for either investors or partners. That doesn't have to be an investor; it could be just partners that also complete your set. What you're missing. So it's all about. It's very, very organic way to think about it, like little microbes coming together and building an ecosystem. And that's what founders do. We build ecosystem. We get people excited about a vision, an idea, and wanting to put themselves into it and to connect into a bigger organism. And that's really fascinating. And just, I mean, like, I just wanted, for what you were saying before, just the whole, like, jumping in between roles and trying different things. It's immensely creative. I think more than sitting on a production studio. I mean, you have so many different things where you can solve problems and think about and learn. It's just so much fun. And so that's about that, about investors and finding partnerships. I think it's no one can do anything on their own, and it's just about really creating an ecosystem for you, for what you want to achieve. So absolutely in the early stages. I guess when you're later, I don't have that experience yet, but I guess when you're in a later stage, like Series A, B, you already know what you're doing. You're already profitable, hopefully. Then you might just need a paycheck to expand. But I guess also there you want to have that smart money that knows how to get you to the next level.
Yeah.
So,
just wanted to ask you a question, because I feel like this is an important one, because obviously, like when you're working, like, and you're building a startup, like a startup that wants to scale quite fast, you need some like venture money for sure. Or at least like most of the time. But obviously we also know that it's quite difficult to get money in the music tech industry. So what's your experience with that? So how do you feel getting money VC money as a music tech startup is different than getting money as a fintech startup, for example?
Yeah, so I think it's not only hard, I think it's actually impossible. And especially in Europe. I don't have the experience in the US, but I think in Europe there's just not enough money.
Yeah.
And if you're in early stage, VCs are not for you. And there are no angels in Europe, basically. Or they are, but they only invest in people that they already know. So I think main thing is to start small. Ideally, you should bootstrap. If bootstrap doesn't work, partnerships. If partnership don't work, friends and family. That you're gonna waste that money because you probably don't know how to be self-sustainable.
Yeah.
And bootstrap. So you're gonna probably waste that money. But it's only about survival. And trying to find your strength and tell that story about your strength, and then, in my personal experience, I wouldn't target at all VCs. I would target corporate partners, so bigger players that are that have basically how you call it, strategic investors.
Yeah.
That I think in Europe is the best play because they have money, they have experience, and VCs in Europe. Well, if you have a B2B business that is already profitable, go ahead. That's gonna work for you. But anything else, or like that's gonna be profitable very, very, very quickly and it's very obvious, and you can show everything very clearly, then I think you can go for that. But if it's something that's unclear yet, but with a big scalable potential, no matter how scalable it is, I don't think you're going to get a VC money in Europe unless you're super tight with the people there.
Yeah,
and they just want to help you out.
Yeah, I would add, because we have experience in Silicon Valley, having been there like for quite some time, but it's going to be like relatively like easier there, but at the same time you need like a strong strong position. So you need to have like revenues, you need to have a kind of like product market fit, or at least like some resemblance of that. People are not gonna just like put money like on your horse if there's nothing like there that tells them, yeah, this could actually be like a good bet. Right? Obviously, the US is way better like than here in Europe, but at the same time, it's not. I mean, a paradise by any means, I would say, and definitely.
Yeah, I can imagine.
No,
yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. I guess there it's probably you need to put a lot of buzzwords into your project for it to be like noticed or like. But I have a feeling that like they take it more. The VCs there. For them, it's more of a gambling game, and they have their portfolio, and they're like they have no idea what they're doing, but they're kind of going very wide and hope that something would stick that would cover all their losses. And in Europe, I feel they're just way more about their
way more conservative.
What they gamble on.
Way more, and not to mention Germany. I mean, yeah.
It's crazy.
Cool.
So that's why I think corporate money or like probably if you're German, I'm not. So we don't have a German on the team, so it's hard for us. But getting probably public funding and corporate partnerships, I think that's probably the way to go over here, especially if you're in an early stage. But you need to have at least one metric that is like really good.
Yeah. You can't just go there with an idea like that.
Yeah,
I guess like it's not gonna work like in 99.9% of the time, right?
Yeah, so. And the problem is that there's two problems. VCs usually are like just bombarded with a lot of companies, and they can't really dive deeply into your idea. Mm-hmm. So, and building a good presentation and a good story It's like one of the hardest things. It's maybe even harder than making the prototype and stuff, you know?
Yeah.
It's really, really tricky. And you never know also, you always get different feedback from different people.
Yeah.
And it's really demotivating at this stage.
Yeah, and
you
also,
need to survive. It's a survival game.
Yeah, that's the point. And at the end of the day, so I've done this, like back when we were in California doing like an accelerator there. Like I fundraised there, and it's such an intensive, time intensive like process to do. Well, if I could like go back in time, probably I would have spent much of that time like on products. Just like build the products, just like move on with the metrics, and then go back when you have a stronger case. Because that's the whole point. Don't just like go beg for money. Just like go there when you have a very strong case. And in the meantime, bootstrap. That's like my 2 cents.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's also important to remember for early stage companies is that if you build a relationship with an investor,
that's going to
and it could be 3 years until they put in their first money.
Yeah.
But every time you go to them and like say, "Hi, I just wanted to show you what we're working on. This is our situation right now."
Yeah.
Go back to him in 6 months. "Hi, just wanted to keep you updated. This is our situation right now," and you're not even asking them for anything. The 6th time you do it and you show constant improvement, you gonna have like so much more chance to get money from them.
Yeah. Once an investor told to me, like the relationship between startup and investor, it's not a dot. So you just don't show up, knock at the door, and ask for money. It's a line.
Exactly.
It's something that's like built over time, and it's a continuous relationship.
And I think like it's a you hear when you start the idea of like you ask for money, you get advice. Ask for advice, you get money. It's actually not. It's similar, but it's not like that. It's asking for advice, but showing your strength and your momentum every time you come back to ask for advice.
Yeah.
So, we improved by this much. What you wanted to share with you thing. If you have some feedback, be happy to talk to you. Do that every 6 months, and you're going to be I think you're going to do good. But you have to have some development, even if it's a bit step backward and forward. I think even just to show the dedication, investors going to love that.
Totally agree on that. Cool. So let's just like shift topic here, because I feel like we've been we've kind of like dug very deep into like the whole startup like investor thing. So let's go back to music and tech a little bit. So I wanted to ask you like a question, because obviously like you are in a position that's perfect to answer this. So how do you feel that technology has changed the creative role of the musician?
That's an very interesting question, or like a phrasing for that question. I don't know if I heard that before. How do I think that technology changed the
creative role and workflow of musician?
Well, if we're talking about electronic music, well, I guess like it's the technology. First of all, technology always drives the changes in music aesthetics, music culture, music styles, music genre. One of the things that advances the development of music styles is technology, obviously. So like you could not, there's certain types of music that you cannot compose without the invention of a piano, because you don't have with the prototype of the piano, like the how it's called, harpsichord, you don't have soft and loud notes. You just have the same exact level. And so the ability to add that to your composition, soft and loud notes, suddenly creates a whole new dimension of in genres of music. Mm-hmm. So the same, obviously, with electronic music. I think how I see it is that there's been different stages in music development, and the invention of the studio and electronic music was the last 100 years basically was a huge exploration of timbre and quality and like texture of sound. So we are able to create our own instruments that sound however the fuck we want. So that's a huge development. So, for example, a musician in the 16th century did not have to worry about, oh, am I gonna make, am I gonna write this piece of music for a metal cello that's made out of metal with like, with buzzy saws, or like they didn't have to ask themselves the questions. The instruments were there, and today musicians, part of their creative process is sound design. It's actually a huge part. I mean, techno music is there's not much melody, harmony, rhythm. It's all about sound design. So I think that's for the last 100 years, and I think what we are just starting now is another maybe 100 years of something new, which is the musicians are starting to be not only the designers of the timbre, but all the designers of the interaction. So because part of what we're trying to do, and I think it's related also to probably like generative music, even if it's not necessarily active interaction, the artist is the designer of a system that lets the listener experience the music, interact with, experience in greater engagement. So not just passive. It could be how, if they're jogging, then how they're running is affecting the music. It could be their location. It could be when they're playing a video game, how it affects how the music reacts. And it could be also interface for making music. So I think we're in the beginning, and that explains a little bit why there's kind of seems to be like a little bit of a buzz, like still early stages, but maybe we're approaching a boom in music tech where there's a lot of people that are wanting to get into music tech and build instruments, build experiences, build products at a higher rate than I think like 10 years ago.
That's cool. And obviously, as part of this development, artificial intelligence is like coming into the game now, because over the last 40, 50 years, like AI has been developed in a number of different fields, from like chess to like doing like stock prediction to doing like planning. To doing like all sorts of things, but now we are seeing for the first time the advent of AI in the field of like in creative fields, like literature, like music. So how do you see like AI like having like an impact, if at all, like in the space?
So this is this is like a bit of I think this is where we might differ in our thoughts.
Yep.
Maybe the first point until now. So I'm a generally a generative music skeptic. I think it's very good for certain things, but I think we differ on some of the expectations from it. So maybe we're not, and maybe we're not. Let's see. So I think it's really depends on different use cases. I think that, we've talked about this before, actually, just recently, and it's cool that we have a chance to dive into it a little bit now.
Yep.
Let me try and explain. So I think that if we go back to the beginning of the conversation, where the essence of music is emotional communication, I think that part AI cannot deliver. I think AI can only deliver the basically learning about music and understanding the structure, so recognizing the patterns and churn out variations on those patterns. And that's what I think. And I think where AI fits is in certain areas into the music ecosystem. And so, for example, for functional music, where you just need to have, you can have some emotional there, but it doesn't go beyond. It's hard to explain. It's like, okay, you can press a button and say, okay, generate for me this mood, and it will do it. But it won't really do it from scratch. So basically,
why would you say it doesn't do it from scratch? What's your deeper point there?
Okay,
obviously I want to challenge you. So
sure.
Be careful what you say.
Right. Okay. So, and I'm happy to be totally mistaken, by the way, but it's hard to communicate a little bit.
Yeah.
I think there's a bottleneck that in music production, and there's a bunch of different things here, but let's focus on one. Okay, so AI can compose a MIDI sequence and a chord progression and a melody that match each other. If you're talking about the grammar of music, for example,
right?
I think it's not very far from some sort of Dadaism, where they would just write different phrases, throw or rearrange the notes, throw them in the air, and whatever order they land in, that's what they're gonna go with. And then, of course, there's a mechanism that says, that the user has to say, okay, I like that, and that teaches the like random phrase maker to output more of that kind of desirable output. So that's, for example, a very, very specific thing that machine learning can do. But under that, okay, so once you have the notes, you need a sample to play them on. And once you have a sample to play them on, you need to have a like a DAW that plays them in the right dynamic. And once you have that, you need a mastering. And if you want to be interchangeable, then you need a completely different understanding. So what I'm trying to say is that the AI right now, as it is inside this generative music, it's very, very limited to the system that you generate around it. And to have true AI music creation, it would need to know like way too many things, and it would be way too general to be able to create something that's out of the box.
Right. Yeah.
Or like out of the
Yeah.
system kind of.
Yeah. I understand like your critique here. I would like I have like a few counter arguments here. So first, so I would say that when you say like the machine learns patterns like of notes, durations, pitches, and things like that, and uses those things, and so it doesn't necessarily have like an emotional layer on top of that. But I would argue that like the emotion is somehow embedded like on those patterns also like in a human musical society as well. Obviously not just like the patterns themselves, but also like the pattern of like performance and production if you're talking about electronic music. And all of these things can be to a certain extent like learned. And when you're saying like there that the machine is somehow like learning stuff, it's not coming up like with things like out of the box, right? There I would challenge you thinking about whether like we as human beings don't do like more or less in a way more sophisticated way like the same thing. So because we are not like born in the wild, and we have a society that we are born into, and we know the musical culture, and we kind of like internalize all of those like patterns, all of those like rules and grammars that are like attached to different types of music out there. And so in a sense, what we are doing is a way more sophisticated learning process than a machine does. But in the end, the machine is kind of mimicking or replicating that process, obviously with completely different meaning, right? And that's for sure. So in a sense, I see a certain level of like comparison there. And you were saying something, Gad?
No, you can continue. Please finish your thought.
Yeah. And as the last thing, I would suggest that, you've actually identified a big problem, which is music is more than just like the notes on a score, in a MIDI score, or I don't know, like in a music XML score. And that's definitely true. But you can take all of these different problems, so like generating like the music, so generating the score, the symbolic information, then putting like a performance on top of that, and then producing that. You can divide all of those problems and just like kind of like focusing on only one every time. And if you get better at one of this, then you can move like to the next. And hopefully by combining together, you're going to be able to create this chain-like workflow where you can come up with some music that's more or less like decent. And that's more or less like what we've done at Melodrive, where we like basically like build the music from scratch, build like the notes, then add some performance to the MIDI, and then produce the music with our own like audio engines, doing some very simple like mastering and mixing. I see that like as a path, like in a sense. And then in the end, I just like want to like remark here that it's not really about like replacing like humans. So we like at Melodrive, at least, we are not into like generative music because we want to replace composers or like producers, rather because we want to give them like more opportunities out there. And I think that AI can be used to explore certain musical landscapes that you as a human being can't possibly explore.
Right. So, okay, there's a lot of wisdom there. I would start from the end and say that, yes, of course, that's cool that you clarified that. And maybe the argument is about some really philosophical of like, if it's even possible, and kind of attacking the essence of music, and can a machine replicate it? But let me touch a bit. So yeah, that's cool. And of course, I do see many interesting use cases for generative and AI music. And if we're going about like assistance for composers, then I think definitely there's something there. Although I think there's a more powerful way to approach it. Okay, let's take just one example, like hitting a button and getting a MIDI arrangement. Yeah. Okay. I don't know. Maybe for like, I don't know. I guess it's hard for me to imagine that it's for professional high-level producers that can. Well, I guess if they can do it, if they can record those notes, that they have it in their head, it's obviously better and faster. And for those that can't, yeah, I guess it can give some support. So, yeah, I guess there is something to it. Okay. I'm also very interested in not only like generating MIDI and compositions, but generating pure audio.
Yeah.
I think for me, that's for example, that's extremely interesting because it has like using WaveNet, which basically, for whoever doesn't know, is like the machine learning that's used for Google Voice. So for human voice, it basically can replicate different kinds of voices and talk and sounding pretty human. So you can use the same kind of system to take a piece of music and generate completely new audio from that. And I think like for generating samples, like infinite variety of samples, it's great. But, and also like in general for music in the last 50 years, the sampler is like the staple, usually the center of the sampler, and the synth are the center of music creation. And I guess like AI can do a lot for both. So it can also create patches in the synth, and it can generate audio, and there's a lot of cool things you can do there. So let's agree on those things, right? We kind of generally agree on that. And now about what you're saying, that you can take the little pieces and do one piece at a time and solve that. And then if you put it all together, they're just gonna vibe off of each other. I'm skeptical about that, number one, because I think the second you add, let's say you solved chord progressions, okay? And you did that. And now let's say you solved melodies that follow chord progressions. There's nothing that in that framework that says that the melody, okay, it can follow the chord progression, but in reality, usually the things, also the chord progression follows the melody. And the meaning in the phrase of a good melody, how it connects with a chord change or with a key change, even sometimes, I don't see any way that you can teach that into a machine, because with human music creation, there's a lot of patterns, and there's a lot of this social layer that we described, but there's also a lot of going outside of it and breaking that. And usually that's how you grab people's attention many times. So like the balance between the familiar and the new. And besides that, just the relationship between the two things is I think even we don't understand it. It's so like intuitive. It's hard to quantify in a way. Now imagine just those two. Now imagine you have to choose the sound, have like tremolo on a guitar, and pitch bending and dynamics that and each one you have to solve separately, but everything influences everything. And in the end, you need to EQ. So like, okay, so the chord progression did like this with that sound, and now you have to EQ like that, and there's a sweep coming in and filtering. All of these things, you can solve each one on its own, but they all affect each other. So how do you combine everything?
I think that's a great point. And indeed, it's one of the issues that we have right now with many generative music systems. So they are kind of like compartmentalized. Okay, so let's do chord progressions here, or let's generate a melody there, or let's do arrangement there. But like humans, as you said, do this thing. They have these feedback loops where they compose some melody, and then they move back to like chord progressions, and they kind of like do all of those things more or less like together, or at least like there's a tight cycle loop there. And for that, you are like perfectly right. We need like better models, like for creating like leads or for creating bridges, I should say, actually, between all of these different tasks. And obviously, it's difficult, but at the same time, it's possible. And there's some research that has gone in that direction. And also, like at Melodrive, we've started doing some kind of like research in there. So how do we have like melody and chord progressions like talking to each other? Then obviously, yeah, the more things you put in the pot, and the more like complex it's going to become. But eventually, you can get there. But then again, the real trick is just like to solve simpler versions of the larger problems, and then just like scale up, just like as you would do like with a product in a startup, right?
Right. So go ahead.
No, so I wanted to like say this, and then On another point regarding like the usefulness like of generative music or like assisted AI assisted composition. So there, I think like that there are like a few use cases that AI could be used to like enhance like our musical possibilities. So I'm thinking here specifically about nonlinear media. So take video games, for example. So there, differently from a film, there you have the narrative, the visuals that respond to whatever like the interactor is doing. So if the player decides to fight a dragon, then I mean the music should do something. If the player decides to go and chill out on a beach, then the music should do something else. So if you think about that,
right? So we're not in disagreement there. I totally see the opportunity there, but I think in that case, I would just say that the computer did not create the music. I would say that the designer of the system created the music, and that's part of my point with that. We're in the beginning of this new wave of music creation. So for me, it's not AI music creation; it's human music creation, and we're just using a tool to play our ideas.
Yeah, but it's a little bit more than just like a playback tool, though, right? So, say for example, you are the designer like of that music. So you come up with a musical script where you have a bunch of like different musical themes that you want to attach to, say, a boss or a landscape. But then these ideas can be implemented in different ways. So it could be like in a jazz style, or it could be like in a more rocky style, or more like orchestral epic, right? And that could be done like in real time by the AI. And so I think like that adds a whole extra level like on top of what's possible. That's like kind of amazing to explore.
I guess what I'm kind of trying to say, that you cannot create that. Okay, and trying to answer both questions. Both points. On the first point about that you say that you can complete all the small pieces and create bridges. So I think at a certain point it becomes exponentially too complex for a human to actually do it, and it's gonna take too long, and that there might be a different approach to do it, like using audio directly to audio, and not because it's like a bottleneck. You have in the beginning generating the composition, just the chord progression, and then you have the melody, you have the effects, the EQ, the drums. Everyone needs its own solution, and they all have to communicate together, and that's what I mean by a bottleneck. So of course, technically, theoretically, it's possible. I just don't think it's feasible unless we spend like many years to do it, or wait until we actually have general AI that can understand problems much deeper and do it and then we don't even know how it's going to do it. So that's my perspective. I think there's a bottleneck there, that it's more complex than just like, okay, spending a few months on this, a few months on that, and then connecting everything. I think it's just a bottleneck, and it's going to get exponentially more complex. And think about it also, when you're a producer and you're sitting down and you're composing a full piece of music, your entire brain is being activated. So completely different regions, everything. So you need to kind of take all of that to make a machine that can really generate any kind of music for any situation. Now, maybe that's not the goal. Maybe the goal is, as you said, do something very functional, very specific. So creating a system for this game or for different games that can handle different situations. And in that case, yes, I agree that it's definitely possible to do something that's matching and helpful. Now, do you want to push back on that, or do you think,
well, I mean,
you understand what I mean with the bottleneck?
I understand like what you mean there, but I mean, So I think like that there are like many like also like approaches to how like we deal with all of these things. And yes, if you had to create like all of these rules, all of these things manually, yes, it could be like overwhelming in a sense. But then we if we have a good like knowledge representation of the music, so a way of like representing music very well and understanding that semantically, then we can use that information and feed that into also like some more like automatic processes like machine learning or things like that. So that could be like more achievable. But then I totally agree with you, like having like a composer, like an AI composer able to do like Bach-like music and perform it with a fantastic sound, and at the same time to create like metal music, it's going to be like very tough. And I don't think like it's not even the point here. It's more like being focused on some things that work and to open up like new opportunities. And obviously, like as in any like engineering problem, you start like with something like small and constrained, and then like you build on top of that until something like magical at some point, hopefully happens. But then I had a slightly like disagreement on you, like on a previous point that you touched upon, which is that of we have like humans have this capacity to create things like from scratch, to like break the boundaries, to just like go outside the borders of like what's like conceivable, like for example, like musically, right? I would argue that, because like most people are not capable of doing that. And if anything, they're actually very stuck on some kind of like musical concepts, and they just like kind of like roam around in very specific like musical concepts. And there's a great philosopher and cognitive scientist whose name is Margaret Bowden, and she was defining different types of creativities. And so she basically provided like a couple of this. And so one is like the so-called exploratory creativity, which is basically, so you have a conceptual space there. So say, for example, Baroque music or like synthwave music, for example, and then you create artifacts which are within the boundaries like of those styles. So Baroque or like synthwave music. And so there you are kind of like... Please, go ahead.
So you're saying that basically the computer, the machine can be sufficiently out of the box inside the system to give that variants.
Let me get there. Let me get to the point.
Okay.
So and this is, let's call this like the exploratory creativity. And you have a bunch of people, the majority of people who like are only like exploratory creative, right? But then you have like a higher version of creativity, which is called transformative or transformational, which is like you come up with completely new musical or like creative concepts, right? So, for example, like for music, take Schoenberg, right, coming up with dodecaphony. So with a type of music which was kind of really outside the box for the time being.
Yeah, understood.
Even though you could argue that obviously Schoenberg was Schoenberg because like he was born like in that specific time and place, and so he knew about Wagner, about the dissolution of like tonality and the use of chromatic.
So you're saying it's basically some people just create a new system.
Yes,
they or change the essential
rules, right? Change the rules of the game. Now, with most creative AI, what we do is just like exploratory creativity, right? So we stay in one place and we hope to create something that resembles something else. So I want to create this chorale that sounds like Bach, for example, right? But then the great thing about like AI, or more in general, like computation, is that it's fast, right? And you can experiment quite a lot. And so you can kind of almost like algorithmically permutationally explore like the musical space, coming up like with things that are like super crazy, and like most of the people wouldn't think like is creative at all. It could be just like some kind of like I don't know, like almost noise, right? And
which for me is like the most one of the interesting things,
right?
Create.
So I'll share this thing, right? So like in my PhD, what it did was building like a system which tried to simulate the way a musical society works. So you have a bunch of like virtual songwriters which can create rock songs, and they are all like a small AIs that generates like this music, and then they can share this music with each other, and based on what they listen to and based on what they like, because they have some kind of like synthetic aesthetic, I would say, right? So they decide what they like, and then they change their compositional style based on what they like, so that they can get closer to what they like. So in all of this, you can think of this system as an evolutionary process, right? So I have like some music that gets generated, and then I have a bunch of like agents which decide if they like the music or if they don't like, and then they change accordingly to what they like. And so this system...
So look, that's amazing. That sounds amazing and fascinating. My point is that in this case, you don't have you don't have you can call them composers.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a semantic thing, but the real composer of this piece is you. That's what I'm trying to say. And it's basically and that maybe goes back to, and maybe that's big part of my point. When people talk about or think about AI music, they're thinking that the machine is creating the music, but actually the real artist is the one that designed the system.
Right. Okay. Let me analyze this point like in 5 seconds before I want just like to finish like the train of what I had there. So like my point there was, okay, so I have this like evolution like in the music potentially, right? And so basically what happened there when I run these simulations was that at the beginning, since like I chose like parameters which were like kind of like decent for what we appreciate like as rock music. So you had some dumb like rock ballads and things like that. And quite decent, but nothing very interesting. Then after a while, you had some variations in these parameters, and basically like the music got kind of like more, like I would say like fuzzier, right? More stranger in a sense. And after a while, if you keep like evolving, you arrive at a point where you don't recognize any rock music in there at all, right? Because the music has evolved like by itself and has gone and trying to find just like musical spaces that we are not used to as rock music. So you may have some resemblance of certain patterns and things, but the music itself was like completely different, completely something else. Most of the time very weird and not really likable, like from a human standpoint. So basically my point is there you had some kind of like exploration of many, many possibilities out there, which necessarily go beyond what's like human likable, because obviously we discussed this like earlier, which is that we have certain like cognitive constraints. So for example, we can't like really appreciate, say, for example, ultrasound music just because we can hear like ultrasounds, right? Whereas it's arguably like a machine could potentially like understand or at least like process that kind of music. And that obviously is an extreme example, but also if you think about like our musical language, it usually it's highly constrained by who we are like biologically and cognitively. So to name just like a thing there, so we usually have like scales, and scales usually have like from 3 to 7 pitches, and that's most likely like correlated with the number of like items that we can retain actively in our short-term memory. So we can say, okay, so there's a C here, there's a D there, and I can't. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I jump into your point?
Sure.
What you said about so the machine had, of course, the machine can create a huge amount of variety outside of the, let's call it whatever system that you started with. Completely understand that.
Maybe I would say not the system, because it was in the system that I designed, but outside the values that I chose for the system to play safely, right?
Right. So basically you're saying that when I said like that the machine would not do something outside of the box, let's say, you might say that actually the machine can go much further outside of the box, even to the point that we don't consider it as music, quote unquote.
Yes.
So my point is that when humans get out of the box, they do it to express emotional meaning. And the machine can't do that. And that's why you can relate with that. And you can relate to even something as extreme as what's called Philip Glass, or like people that really broke conventions. They still had emotion there. So even like the famous piece from what's his name, 425 or whatever, that is complete silence. Yeah, okay, so John Cage is a great example, because you could say that he's completely changed all the rules till it's beyond recognition of music, but there's still emotion there. And the emotion rings very loud. But so even if it's just playing on a typewriter.
I would say, is the emotion coming from your projection there? And knowing the fact that there's a human being like on the other side, right?
So so I think it's probably both,
right?
But let's dumb it down a little bit. Okay, not like John Cage, Michael Jackson.
Right.
Okay,
well, that's quite the jump, right?
Okay, let's talk about Michael Jackson.
Yeah.
He used all the pop rules in the world, like followed like Quincy Jones. Like it's like very, very, very clear following all the rules. But then he does, that's out of the box.
Yep.
But it means something. And you feel it. And you're like, wow, I get it. That's that feeling. And there's no words, and you can't quantify it, and you can't create a model that explains that to the machine.
I would argue you can. I would, to a certain extent, which is Michael Jackson. What he has done there is basically using most of the conventional grammar, but then he added some unexpectedness like on top of that. And so there was a super nice balance between like what I can predict knowing like Michael Jackson's and like the 80s and 70s like pop rules, music rules. But at the same time, he added something completely unexpected on top of that. And that in itself is a good predictor of something that we may be interested in. Now,
right, but
a math
so
equation for that, but I could try to understand that like at least on a qualitative level.
I think in theory you're right, but in practice I'm sorry, but I think you're wrong. Right. And part of that is that Michael Jackson did not have external, or did not have a system to try out different or different. He didn't do varieties and then had external or internal or whatever, a way to say, okay, that's the winning shtick, you know?
Right.
He did it not from a place of exploration, but from a place of expression.
I'm going to challenge you here as well. And I'm going to say, I think like we have two quite opposites, like philosophical points. So I feel like my understanding like of the human being like is way more like deterministic, like in a sense, right? And way more confined. So I feel like we are way more constrained and confined that you may feel like we actually are. And so it's a little bit like saying, so why don't we have like Michael Jackson like in the 15th century? Because like it was like completely outside of the box like at the time. And if we had like someone like Michael Jackson, it probably wouldn't have survived, because like people around him wouldn't have like understood what like that music like stood for like at all, right?
Sure. Well, I think that that might be wrong, and there quite likely has been many Michael Jacksons throughout history. They just did not have the reach or the memory, because and that's another thing, that you might have a bias, because you come from, as I understand, more from the classical world,
definitely,
and not so much from the folk world. And I think that's the difference. And when from my musical roots are based on folk, and not on like high, you could call it high music or no, and with the dance music, pop music, funk, hip hop, all these things. There's something there. You can call it soul, although so I understand, in your perspective, human beings have no soul. We're machines.
I wouldn't say that.
No, it's a joke. It's a joke. But it's kind of what you're saying when you're saying that the human being is deterministic, and I understand that point.
Yeah.
But I would say specifically about Michael Jackson that I believe that there have been many Michael Jacksons throughout history. It's just that we don't know about them, and that there have been folk heroes that were musicians that people adored. Like, I don't know, take for example, instead of classical music from the 16th century, like the classical story of from Greek mythology about Perseus, or what's his name, that was the great musician that everyone followed him and fell in love with him. Like folk. Wait a second. Sabrina, what's the name of the Greek mythology guy that played music and went back to hell? Orpheus.
You're right. Yeah. Good.
So I think Orpheus was less a Mozart guy and more a Michael Jackson. And probably folk music back in the day, it had different rules, but it had the same emotional expression. And that emotional expression is something that combines melody, harmony, rhythm, dynamic, timbre, and some X factor,
right,
that you cannot quantify with a machine, not yet. And if you can, it's just a huge bottleneck, and it's like beyond current capabilities. And that's basically where that's what I feel. So you can create these, and it's not to diminish anything about AI or generative. It's just that it's always going to be for the foreseeable future, in my opinion. It's going to be an extension of the musician, and it's like another layer. So if until now we had the composition, and we had now generating the sound and the production, so now it's another layer, which is creating the system that generates. But the artist is still
accept that.
The coder. That's the musician is the coder.
Yeah, I totally accept that. Like, in the sense that I don't want to replace like musicians, but and definitely I want for AI like to be a servant like to the musician. But at the same time, I'm very fascinated by the ability to reproduce, to replicate like certain like musical creative processes, and understand if you can push music like in directions that we have never explored, just like by leveraging this incredible power, computational power, of machines, right?
And that, I think, is an amazing endeavor, fascinating and important. But all I'm saying is that you're the artist here, not your code.
There may be like someone who would like disagree with you there, saying, well, but in the end, also like the human being is not really like the human being like himself or herself, like the artist, but is the kind of like the contribution of all the history behind that like specific instance of human being, like that specific Michael Jackson or Mozart, who's like creating that amazing music, right? So
it's like a filter. You're saying that the consciousness as a filter for the past and the culture and all this stuff.
Yeah. And
so maybe you're generating with your filter, your consciousness, you're creating a new filter.
Yes, that's basically the thing.
And that's interesting because it touches to the basic heart of the concept of AI. We're basically like, we're trying to create a consciousness, but it's not a consciousness yet.
No. And I don't see it coming conscious for a very long time, at least.
So I'm thinking that music is it's connected. It's the output, and it's the systematic, and it's the grammar, and it's the logic.
Yeah.
But there's also element of consciousness there.
Yeah.
And that's where, and the consciousness is still yours. So like, if you created the system, you created a filter for your ideas and your interpretation of music to generate, and you're enabling other people to also jump into that and let their consciousness go in and play with that and generate something new out of it. Yeah, and that's beautiful. I think we're doing the same thing. Actually,
yeah. I would say there's still like possibility for like emergence, just like in my system, which went like in ways I couldn't foresee before, even though like it was like in the realm of possibilities that I constrained, but still like it went in directions and at some point you just like lose track. It's so many possibilities that it's basically almost like infinite, right? So if the system is powerful enough, if you have enough parameters, like the system can explore. But I
think emergence is a good word. And like you can give another example. If about exploration and emergence. So if a guitar player in the last century is like playing one note, ding, 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 and then he moves his finger just a little bit because he had an itch, and suddenly it was in a weird position that gave the string a bit of metallic sound because it was vibrating against the fret. So it was, instead of ding, ding, it would sound like it was like, and he had some internal consciousness that says, "Oh wow, that's cool, that's new. Sounds a bit like I don't know, like a dog, or like it sounds a bit dirty. That gives me a historic connotation. Okay, I'll try to incorporate that into my sound." And suddenly you change history, okay? Or like plucking or slapping. There's also emergence there, but I think the difference is that there's an emergence that's accompanied with consciousness, some expression, and some internal decision. Evaluation, decision, which in your project that you described, which is quite beautiful, sounds like it dissolves into entropy instead of coming out with some specific innovation.
It could be. Well, Gad, I think that this was
that was cool.
An amazing chat. I want to ask you one final question, which is, where do you see Jambl in 3 years from now?
Oh, I'm gonna sell out and like sell to Google, sell all your data, and go and buy an island. And
okay, as long as you invite me, that's fine.
No, I'm. We're working hard to improve the product. Right now, we're like we're trying to get our math right so that we're more profitable, so that we're actually starting to be profitable, so we can reinvest in the product. And there's a few goals. One, we want to increase retention, engagement, all those metrics. But one metric I think it's really important is that beyond satisfying users, beyond which is like number one, beyond surviving and achieving our business goals, we want to make a product that we're very proud of, and that is actually a very powerful music creation tool. And in 3 years, we want to be the leaders in this music creation on mobile market, and have the biggest community of new creators, and bringing millions and millions of new people into making music.
That's fantastic. I'm really hoping like this dream comes true, because you guys have like all the skills and all the ideas in place. So just hang on there and push as much as you can, and get to your promised land.
Thank you so much.
Cool. Okay, so
Thanks, man. It was a really amazing talk to you.
Yeah, fantastic.
That was fascinating conversation. Thank you so much.
Cool. Okay. Bye-bye, Gad.
Okay, bye. Thanks.
And this was my conversation with Gad Hinkis. The Sound of AI Fireside Chats is published every month and produced by Melodrive. If you'd like to know more about AI music, you can visit our website at melodrive.com and take a look at the Knowledge Center section. If you like the podcast, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more. Bye for now.